I learned that Midjourney can tile images with a flag that you put in your prompt, dash dash tile. And you might not be able to tell, but this is an example of the output. If you took one of these images and you were to repeat it, it would actually continue on the edges. Let me open up one so you can see a little bit better. So you can see on the left and right, for example, you've got the purple and the green lines here, and then on the right, they continue. So if you look on the edges of the left and right, and the top and the bottom, you can see how it repeats over. You can't really verify that, especially when you're looking at a more like organic type of design, like a forest or something like that, unless you actually cut it and put it in, Photoshop or something and repeat it. And so I wanted to have an easy way to just turn this into a desktop background. And it's my understanding that I remember that being something that's easy to do on Windows relatively, but it's not something that's easy to do on, I don't think it's easy to do on a Mac and on a phone. So I was thinking about it like that could be a pretty easy web application. Like I've put images on Canvas before, and that seems like something that could be pretty simple with a front end web app. At the same time, I wanted to try coding something using ChatGPT because I've seen people do that with little tools of this type of complexity. And so, yeah, I thought I would give it a shot. So I want to take you through how approached it. So I started a conversation with ChatGPT where I just said, "Can you help me invent a web app?" The user would provide an image and the app would tile it, giving them a new image the same size as their screen, filled with the tiled image. The user could adjust the scale of the tiling also. One thing I've noticed about these prompts, and I'd like to refine it a little bit, is when you're just like, "Hey, can you help me make an app, or can you help me invent an app?" Sometimes it'll just go into great detail on a description of like it's like a functional description, and sometimes it'll like produce a bunch of code like way too early in the process. So I'd like to understand, how do I start high level, and once I make sure that it's like understanding what I'm saying, then add fidelity and then get into code. So I'm learning how to have that sort of conversation with it. But anyway, I read what it said, and its first description of how the app would work had a Node.js backend using Express, and it's using Python for image processing. I was like, whoa, 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 I don't want any of this stuff. So I just said the app would have no backend or file hosting. The entire app runs in the browser. And then it kind of just edited its description, and even when it talked about how it works, it talked about using Canvas and HTML. So it's kind of interesting that it opted for like a full stack web application, and then when I was like, "Hey, don't do that," and it was like, "Oh yeah, we can just use Canvas." And then I didn't go into a lot of detail in its description. I was like, "Yeah, I kind of scrolled through with the same speed I'm doing right now, like input file, yeah, that makes sense, blah blah blah." And then I was like, "Okay, it sounds like it's not going to do anything crazy. Can you write it for me?" And then it produced this plain JavaScript sort of output, which is kind of cool because it doesn't require any sort of build system. And you could literally just throw these up in S3 and it would do what you want. And I believe, I'm trying to remember, at this point, I think everything did work the way that I mean, it technically does work, like, period. But as I was perusing it, I started giving it feedback, and I gave it two types of feedback. One was like features that I would want to see, and then the other is like the format that I want the code in, which if I was just going to deploy this and never work on it ever again, I think you could just use whatever it gives you. But I wanted to produce something that I could add to an existing project that I have and would follow my coding conventions. So I noticed inside of the inside of the code, I just noticed a couple of things, which I could have just deployed this and then noticed it when I used the app, but I did something. There was like some bugs, I guess you could call them, or things that didn't do what I asked that I noticed in the code, and then other things later that I noticed when I was actually using it. So first I noticed that it set the canvas size to the inner width, inner height of the window, which I know it is actually the window size, not the screen size. So it kind of misunderstood what I was saying there. So I said, let's use the screen size instead of the window size. Also add a preview of the tiled image, which I don't think it did right here. It just generated the image when you went to download it or something. Anyway, it added a preview canvas, and it changed the window inner width to screen dot width. I don't know why it didn't just do that out of the gate, but I didn't have to go, look up documentation on what the correct thing was. It just fixed it for me. So this was actually pretty good based on what I was seeing. I still hadn't run it, but I was just looking at the code and I was like, yeah, this is basically what I would write if I was doing it in plain JS, but can you rewrite it using React, Chakra UI, and Lodash? These are like libraries that I use for rapid prototyping. It ended up not using Lodash, but it pretty much not only told me how to install React and Chakra, but it replaced all the elements or most of them, with Chakra elements, and it rewrote the whole thing to be a stateful React application. One thing that's kind of interesting. Well, wait a minute. I didn't notice this, but is this even? Oh, okay, yeah, this is where it went off the rails. Okay, so at this point, it abandoned the canvas. Let me just make sure. Yeah, it abandoned the canvas, and it just made a repeater of images. And it said, down here, it says, the download functionality isn't implemented in this sample. So you need to do it by converting to a canvas, to a data URL, and all this stuff. So it's weird that it just knows that it did it wrong, or that it did a mock-up and it abandoned the previous thing that worked when it converted it to React. But I was like, hey, let's use the canvas, like you said, so you can download the image. And it's like, oh yeah, sure. And then I rewrote it. So it's like it can get derailed. I think maybe if I learned something from that, I would say, tell it what your coding conventions are and your like baseline, like I'm going to use React and all that stuff. I should have mentioned that up front. And then I think it would have had an easier time iterating and growing the application from there. Asking it to rewrite it later, it actually did a pretty good job, but it did go off the rails. So it brought back the tiling logic, and it brought back the canvas and stuff. And then I asked it to implement TypeScript. Again, I probably should have done that up front. But this part was actually flawless, because at this point I started copying it into my code base, and I could see all the things that were warnings, like canvas ref.current can be undefined because it's a React ref, and so it didn't put the optional chaining in there. So now when I asked it to use TypeScript, it fixed all that stuff. And it even used like canvas element here for typing the use ref and stuff. So it did a pretty good job. I think this eliminated. Oh yeah, there were a couple more TypeScript issues. So it kind of did the optional chaining for the ref, but it didn't like exit. Like if you're trying to do something with a DOM element ref, then if it doesn't exist, you should just exit the function. And I kind of didn't do that. So I just told it what the issues were, and it fixed those. And I asked it, oh yeah, can we use Chakra UI for the file input? That one was interesting because it did it, but it looked broken. So yeah, it did input from Chakra type equals file. So because the Chakra UI file inputs are not styled, they work, but it looks ugly. So it was kind of funny that it avoided doing that. It was like, yeah, this is going to look stupid, so let's not do it. And then, so at this point, I was running it in the browser, it was working, and I just wanted it to be more in line with the code base that I was going to bring it into. And I'll bring it over here. I'll show you this component. So what it did is it created a standalone component. And then what I did in my application was I just created a page and a route to host that component. So I could just copy the code. And there's a little shortcut on these code blocks to just copy it and paste it directly in there. So at this point I asked it, I have some coding conventions, and these are just things that I do for rapid prototyping. And it implemented all of those almost flawlessly. It did make a mistake, just a simple mistake right here. It has a node that's UI.button and it closed it with /button. So that was just completely broken, but easy to fix. So at this point, so at this point I started to like just fix stuff for it. Like I fixed the button, I changed some markup, I put some styling in. I ended up wrapping the file input with a label and just hiding the input and making my own button. And I can show you what this looks like. I mean, it's super simple. But essentially, this is basically what it looked like when I loaded it up. It just had weird image aspect ratio issues. It was like running off the page and it was like squishing it and stuff. So it was just a visual thing that I think it probably had a hard time dealing with, and it was like 2 seconds for me to fix it myself, so I just started working on it. Now at this point, the code in the file had diverted from what it had created, so I couldn't just copy updates and paste them. If I asked it to make a change, I had to go in and surgically say, oh, what changed, and copy those functions over. So that's kind of an interesting thing. Like, I think if it was more integrated into my IDE, which maybe GitHub Copilot Chat will, it would be like incredible. But right now it was just kind of a back and forth between my my code editor and here. So the last thing that I did, and I was really pleased with this, is I said, can you add the option to paste an image from the clipboard instead of the file input? Because you don't want to have to save the file and then go browse to it all the time. If you can just copy it, then that's easier. So it added a handle paste, and it did all this for me, like extracting the data from the clipboard and getting the blob as a file. I mean, all this stuff. I would have had to look this up on MDN to figure out how to do all this. So that was cool that it wrote it all for me. And then it put the on paste callback on the container of the layout. So basically your cursor has to be focused somewhere in the page to do it. I could have asked it to change how it did the handle paste, but I just did it myself, because the way to do it with being able to paste it anywhere in the window is you just do a use effect where you add the event listener on the document and do the callback there. So, it was like 5 lines. And yeah, so does it work? Yeah, so let's try it. I have Midjourney. I'm gonna open this image we were looking at earlier, copy it. I'll go over to my tool, paste. You can change the scaling. I didn't talk about this, but you can change how much you want it to scale. But it defaults to being a full pixel, like 1-to-1 pixel aspect ratio. And then you can just copy the image. This is just a feature of the canvas in browsers. You can just copy the image, or you can download it. I already have downloaded it and put it in my my pictures folder. So we can go to desktop and go to pictures. There it is. I haven't tried it on the phone yet, and I haven't tracked how much time I spent on this, but I mean, you can see the conversations that I've had. Like, it hasn't taken, like, this is the effort that I put into this entire project, is just asking it questions, and then I don't know, less than an hour of just kind of like tinkering. I mean, honestly, all I did was adjust some spacing and stuff. So 30 minutes. I feel like it was like 30 minutes of conversation and 30 minutes of editing and wiring up the route, and it's done.